I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Welcome to the RANE Insights podcast from RANE Network. In this episode, David Lawrence, co-founder of RANE, speaks with Teague Egan about the work his company is doing in the lithium industry. Teague is the founder and CEO at EnergyX, a clean energy tech company that's developing efficient and sustainable technology to aid the extraction and production process for lithium. Teague is a serial entrepreneur and has previously started businesses in entertainment. He is also the inventor of EnergyDNA, a patented multi-component graphene textile fiber technology.
Teague, thanks again for making time for this conversation. Comes at a very important inflection point in the market. As on a wholesale basis, the focus is on the climate, conversion to electric vehicles, carbon reduction, etc. And I thought I would, start a little bit with the background, your personal journey, and how you came to form EnergyX, because you've done a number of things, and I think it would be of great interest to the audience. So let me give you the floor for a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. I agree. My entrance into the lithium world is a bit unorthodox, but I think every now and then things need to be shaken up a little bit. My background is of just serial entrepreneurship. I think of myself as a problem solver, a team builder, and lithium was an industry that was prime for disruption. The way that lithium has been produced today, or to date, is a very antiquated method, and the industry has a huge demand today and even larger growing demand into the future for this critical battery material in which the manufacturing methods are extremely outdated. So therein lied the opportunity that I recognized back in 2018, and that became the problem that I set out to solve. I recognized the problem when I was traveling through South America and went to one of the world's largest lithium reserves that sits within the Lithium Triangle between Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. And I saw these evaporation ponds that are responsible for all brine production today. And I just knew that there had to be a better way than these evaporation ponds to produce lithium. And that's why I started working on what's now called direct lithium extraction technology, or DLE. And prior to me getting into the natural resources or chemical lithium processing and refining business, I was working on different startups in the technology and real estate space, as well as the investment and finance world. But this is certainly captured all my attention and is a critical problem that the world needs to solve. So we've certainly come a long way in the past 4.5 years since EnergyX was started, and I look forward to sharing a little bit more about that with you.
That's great, and I love the description of a market that needed to be disrupted, and your self-description as a entrepreneurial problem solver. So I want to get into that and tie this together. If we can just back up, because I want to make sure that the audience has what I'll refer to as a foundational level of understanding about lithium and why it is so critical in the evolution of electric vehicles and in the conversion of various products that will curb carbon emissions, and why it is, I'll call it an essential material to the process. So maybe you can give us a little bit of, we'll call it basic background about lithium and its essential role in what's being built and what people are trying to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. So lithium is a critical element in batteries because of its inherent properties on the periodic table. The periodic table obviously is all the foundational elements of any material in the world, and lithium happens to be the lightest alkali metal known to man. And this is important because when you think about having batteries or energy storage devices, there's really two kinds or two main applications. One is stationary storage. So if you're trying to store energy and power like a house or a building or a grid or something where the battery is stationary, then it doesn't matter how heavy it is. The battery could weigh 1,000,000 pounds, but it's just sitting there on the ground. The other type is for mobility applications. So if you're trying to use stored energy to power a car or a laptop or a phone, then the weight of that battery becomes very important. You don't want to carry a phone that weighs 30 pounds. And even more importantly, for an electric vehicle, to be able to power that electric vehicle, the weight of the whole vehicle and really importantly, the battery is critical. So when you're thinking about this metric or KPI, it's called energy density. And you want to have the most energy in the battery for the lightest weight. And that is what's called energy density. And because lithium, going back to the periodic table, is the lightest metal on the periodic table, it was chosen super early on to be the base material in all energy storage devices, specifically for mobility applications. So today, there's a variety of different battery chemistries that people have developed, but the common denominator amongst all of them is lithium. And lithium is the material that basically holds the charge when you plug it into an energy source. And then it's the material that discharges the energy into whatever application you're using, whether it's a phone or a car. And for those reasons, lithium has become critical to the whole energy transition because it's the main material that is going into all the batteries that's storing the energy.
So it's fair to say lithium is the essential element.
It is.
Okay. And very exciting what EnergyX is doing and what you're doing. And so I'll ask what I'll refer to as the famous business professor and author Peter Drucker used to ask a basic question of CEOs, which is, what is your business? And so I'd like to actually ask that. What is the business of EnergyX, and what are you doing that is different, and if I can use a cliche word, that is disruptive of existing practices around lithium?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier that all lithium from brine-based resources today is produced through the evaporation pond method. Brine-based resource. Let me just actually take a step back. There's two main types of lithium resources. One is hard rock, and you can think about like a huge open pit, ore mining type scenario where rock is dug up, and then the lithium or metal that is of target in that is leached out. That has a pretty high carbon penalty, and that's why a lot of people think they're of dirty mining practices because of open pit hard rock mining. The other resource type that lithium is found in is brine, and brine is a word for highly salty water. So you can think about ocean water. That's about 3.5% salinity or salts dissolved in the water. The brines where we find the good concentrations of lithium have 30% salt dissolved in water, or it's called TDS, total dissolved salts. So it's a very, very salty concentration in the water. These are areas like the Dead Sea, where you can actually float in the water. It's so salty. The Great Salt Lake has, I think, around 8 or 9% total dissolved salts. That has decent lithium concentrations, but this is the brine-based resource now that I'm talking about. And there's a lot of high lithium concentration brines that are found in the Lithium Triangle, this area that I went to for the first time and discovered this opportunity down in South America. So today, what the lithium companies do is they pump the brine up. They drill a small well and pump the brine up. That's pretty non-invasive. But then they put it into these massive evaporation ponds that are literally 15 square miles in size, the size of New York City, Manhattan as a whole. And then they let the brine sit in these ponds for months. The average residence time is 18 months that it sits in this pond sequence. And then when it finally gets to the end, they've only recovered between 30 and 40% of the initial lithium that was pumped out in the beginning wells before they put it into the ponds. So you can start to see how inefficient the existing methods of lithium production from brine-based resources truly are. And this is where the opportunity lies. So going from that type of production scenario to something where you can literally just pump the brine up and feed it into a facility that directly extracts the lithium from the brine, and then you can re-inject the water or the remaining brine minus the lithium back into the ground to not disturb the water table is an extremely attractive proposition. It uses, we talked about the ponds being 15 square miles. This uses maybe a couple acres of land. We talked about the ponds taking about 18 months to process the brine. This takes a matter of hours. And most importantly, the ponds only having 30 to 40% recovery rate, direct lithium extraction has over 90% recovery rate. So you can start to see where our process of direct lithium extraction is better on all fronts. And ultimately, this equates to more abundance of lithium that's extracted in a more efficient manner in a more cost-effective way. And ultimately, that's going to be the way that lithium is produced in the future to supply this critical material to battery makers for electric vehicles.
So basically, there's an efficiency play here in terms of the process that you've developed for the extraction of lithium.
Right.
But
So you asked what our business is. We make
Yeah.
this technology, and we partner with these existing lithium producers to deploy our technology at the resource site. And we either license them the technology or we help build the facilities and sell the lithium to the end users.
Right. So I wanted to draw that point of distinction. You're not actually involved as we'll call it a natural resource company that is out there mining or looking for it, but you partner with existing companies to provide the technology or support the implementation or installation of the technology.
Correct.
Now, I also know that there are some environmental advantages to the process that you've outlined that you've helped to develop. So it's not just an efficiency play in this in the extraction business, but maybe you could talk about some of the environmental advantages of what EnergyX is doing.
So this is obviously a very important aspect of our business. I mean, we are pushing the energy transition forward to renewable, sustainable sources. And having batteries is one of the most important parts of that energy transition. But it all depends on what you're baselining environmental sustainability against, right? And if you think about lithium versus and energy storage versus fossil fuels, I'll just lay out kind of the way, at least the way I think about it. So whenever you're extracting anything out of the ground, out of the earth, there's a carbon penalty, like pretty much no matter what. Let's just say that that carbon penalty is 10x, right? But then when you apply whatever material you've now produced into society, for oil and gas or fossil fuels, you literally burn it once, and then that has another carbon penalty. Let's call that 10x as well. And then you need to go extract more, right? For lithium and batteries, there's a carbon penalty for extraction, but then there's basically no carbon penalty for application because you can reuse a rechargeable battery thousands of times, which equates to tens of years of usage. And then now that lithium is produced, there's large companies getting into battery recycling where you can reuse those battery materials and avoid the initial extraction carbon penalty again. So when you baseline lithium versus fossil fuels, there's no comparison whatsoever. So now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the carbon penalties of lithium. And when you compare the two resource types that I mentioned earlier, brine versus hard rock, again, there's really not a comparison. Hard rock is digging up huge pieces of earth that take, massive dump trucks and backhoes and just huge, heavy machinery. Then there's a carbon-intensive leaching process and a lot of waste versus the brine-based extraction, where today, the main carbon penalty is the pumps that you need to pump the brine up from subsurface, which is minimal. And then in ponds, you're literally using natural sunlight to evaporate the water and let the salts crash out. There's obviously, some labor and you're moving trucks around to scoop up the salt once it's precipitated. And then there's a final processing facility, but it's a pretty non-carbon emitting scenario. When you then compare traditional evaporation ponds to DLE, I think there's a few advantages in DLE and a few disadvantages, quite frankly. Number one is that you definitely use less power for ponds than you do for DLE, because during the pond process, you're using natural sunlight to evaporate the water. Now, I think that number is relatively close, but I'll give that win to the ponds. On the other side, the advantages of DLE are, one, you're using far less surface area, so you're not digging up huge, you're not building big ponds that take up 15 square miles. And two, you're not wasting a lot of that precious water that's making up the water table in some of these areas that have indigenous communities. So the wins from an environmental standpoint of DLE are less land usage and less water, and then a lot less labor. I mean, you can run one of these plants with, a few dozen people versus a few hundred people for ponds. So that's how I think about what we're doing from a sustainability standpoint.
That's great, because what has been conspicuously absent in a lot of the discussion about the transition in terms of energy is, and I've seen this play out in the political debates, is net, are we accomplishing anything? And
Right. Yeah.
I love your use of the term penalty, which is very much a sustainability term, but I think of it in terms of, as many business people that are going to be listening here, cost benefit. Okay, I understand the benefits here, but all in, what are the costs, including the externalities of what we're doing? And so it's interesting the way you have focused on it, because you actually have incorporated into your approach an attempt to calculate the true costs and benchmark them against alternatives. So does this come out as a net positive when people think about society, when they think about the environment, they think about the climate, et cetera? And so very important. And you didn't happen to mention labor safety. Mining is inherently, always has been, a very dangerous industry. Are there labor safety benefits to your process as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, once the facilities are built, it's you know almost all automated. The brine is pumped up in the wells and piped to the central facility. It goes through our electrochemical separation, processing, and refinery, where there's barely any hands-on dangerous interaction, and ultimately it's processed into battery grade salt, battery grade lithium salt that is then packaged up and shipped off to the cell makers. And this whole plant can be operated with a few dozen people that are operating it mostly through computers and things of that sort. So of course there's some maintenance that needs to occur at different times and cleaning, but all that is extremely safe. So there's not like the heavy machinery that is prevalent in open pit mines and things like that. And we take safety very seriously. I think all mining companies take safety very seriously, have a pretty good track record, but there's a lot less instances of something going wrong with direct lithium extraction as opposed to alternatives.
That's great. And is this technology ready to be deployed, Teague, or is it often to the near-term future?
So the point that we're at right now is building our demonstration plant. So when we think about technology being ready to be deployed, we think about that through what's called the TRL scale, or technology readiness level scale. And this is a scale that was created by NASA. So it's a very standardized scale from 1 to 9, where 1 is like an idea and 9 is a full commercial plant. As you work back from 9, 8 is a demonstration plant that is the last step before full commercialization. And 7 is an infield pilot plant. And then 6 is like vertically integrating the parts of a pilot plant and testing it in the laboratory. And then you could go down 5, 4, and so forth. We have already completed an infield pilot plant, so TRL 7, and we're building our infield demonstration plants, which are much larger versions of the pilot plant. And that is what we're working on right now. So we just completed our Series B financing, which was a $50 million financing led by General Motors. We're using that capital to build 5 demonstration plants in areas that have big lithium companies. So we're building a demonstration plant in Chile, which is the largest producer of brine-based lithium in the world. We're building a demonstration plant in Argentina, which is the second country that makes up the Lithium Triangle and has about 30 potential customers in Argentina. And then we're building 3 demonstration plants in the United States in areas that have really good lithium resources today. So one in Arkansas. Recently, Exxon just purchased a big piece of property, a lithium resource, for $100 million in Arkansas, and we're building a demonstration plant near to that. And there's several other customers in this region that are already producing other base materials such as bromine from the brine-based resources. We're building a demonstration plant in Utah near the Great Salt Lake. There's probably between half a dozen and a dozen salt companies that are producing other types of materials right there, and there's great lithium resources in that area. And then one in California in the Salton Sea, which has now been dubbed the Lithium Valley, a demonstration plant there. So we're in discussions with dozens of different customers in these 5 locations, and this will be the last step, these demonstration plants, before we start building full commercial plants in the next 1 to 2 years.
That's exciting. And I recently read an article that Maine seems to be a center for lithium as well.
Yeah. I saw that too.
Yeah.
That's super exciting. However, that resource type is the hard rock resource type that I mentioned.
It is interesting.
Yeah, it's not a brine based, and not like I don't want to diminish the hard rock resource type. Like it is producing a lot of lithium today. I think that today the split of production, like how much lithium comes from brine and hard rock, is around 50-50. It may be slightly in favor of brine, but the reason that we chose brine to develop cutting edge technology for it was for 4 reasons. One is that there's a lot less exploration risk with brine. Like, we know where these resources are. For the most part, we know how large they are. Like, you can generally quantify brine aquifers or reserves, as opposed to like hard rock. Like, you don't really know where the hard rock ends, so to say, or how much lithium is there. So that's number one. Number 2 is that, like I mentioned earlier, actually number 2 is that we know that brine is the larger resource type. It makes up about 75% of the global known reserves. So it's a larger total addressable market. Number 3 is that, what I mentioned earlier, there's definitely less of a carbon penalty for extracting lithium from brine than there is digging up hard rock. So that's, a big consideration of ours. And then ultimately, number 4 is that there's a lot more ability to introduce new technology into brine, and the step change in going from the evaporation pond method to this DLE method is a lot more efficient, cost effective, and a much greater opportunity to introduce cutting edge technology than there is in hard rock, where no matter what, you have to dig up all these chunks of earth and then basically leach out the lithium. So for those 4 reasons, we decided to pursue brine-based resources, but hard rock will surely continue to produce a good deal of lithium moving forward.
Okay, that's great. And when I earlier asked you to explain to the audience what your business is, there's actually a secondary answer which I'd like to suggest to you, which is, in light of everything going on in the world, you're actually in the geopolitical risk business because of the competitive nature of finding lithium, the need to sort of enter into appropriate supply chain agreements, the process by which companies will have access to, I'll call it a precious element. All of that is very much playing out in the geopolitical stage. And I'm curious how you think about that. You mentioned Bolivia and Argentina. It's been publicly recorded about, Russian and Chinese interest in these areas and the natural resources. But how do you think about the fact that you actually are in the geopolitical business?
Yeah. For South America, we certainly are. For the U.S., not so much, and that's why we're focused on
Right.
both areas.
Although, Teague, I'm going to argue that sometimes getting in the middle of state politics can be as risky as
That's true.
being down there in South America. Go ahead.
It's
Yeah.
all about what you benchmark it against, of course, right? Like the U.S. has made a huge point in terms of trying to domesticate our supply chain for battery materials. So, I look at like if we're just siloing out geopolitical risk, I look at the U.S. as being less risky than South America, and that's why we've diversified our demonstration plants and therefore our kind of resource allocation to some in the U.S. and then some in South America. For South America, the three countries that make up the Lithium Triangle are Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. And Bolivia was the place that we put our first pilot plant and validated our technology in the field. And then, our relationship and that kind of initiative got turned upside down on its head because Bolivia ultimately chose China and Russia to commercialize their lithium reserves. So, that's a scenario where Bolivia as a country owns the entire lithium resource. There's no kind of private markets in Bolivia in terms of natural resources. So I learned firsthand the risks of geopolitics from that. I think that Chile and Argentina are a little bit more stable in terms of their politics and their friendliness to the private sector. So that's why we're building our two demonstration plants in those two countries respectively. But there's certainly geopolitics in those two countries as well. Chile's gone through a change of administration where they basically said that the government will have a hand in all lithium and it will be a public-private partnership. So it's not necessarily to the extent of total nationalization that Bolivia has, but the government of Chile wants their share. You have to assume that Argentina is going to do the same thing, but to date, Argentina has had their borders a lot more open, and that's why you've seen large companies like Rio Tinto move in and start to develop lithium production projects. Same thing with POSCO, which is a huge $100 billion South Korean company, as well as a lot of the Chinese. So, from the country itself, I think there's geopolitics involved, and then from a competitive standpoint, we're competing against. This is literally an arms race between China and the U.S. to secure battery raw materials and then bring that home to process and refine. And China is crushing us in that right now. And there's geopolitics from the standpoint that China has a lot more capital and there's a lot more state-backed companies that can offer more incentives to resource owners or states, Chile and Argentina, to win the resources. So those are kind of some of the aspects that I think about from a geopolitical standpoint. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Dave. They're extremely prevalent in the business that we're in.
And I just in the few minutes we have remaining, Teague, you have a unique technology, and I know you have patent protections. As your business does scale and achieves adoption, how do you think about sort of protecting and thinking about which markets you're going to enter into, and license versus installing the technology, et cetera? Again, it's been no secret that many U.S. and European companies who have gone into some of the developing markets, one of the big concerns they've had is, whether or not they were going to lose control around their technology and what I'll refer to as, proprietary information.
So we have almost 100 patents around our technology, and we work extremely hard to protect the intellectual property that we've developed at EnergyX to date, and will continue to file patents, global patents, in the countries in which we operate, manufacture, or where there's potential resources. So, that's the first thing that we can do. The second is, of course, still try to protect the know-how as best we can. And I mean, whenever you're going into a relationship with a company, I think that trust is certainly very important, and we want to trust the partners that we're working with, whether that's manufacturers or our resource partners. But it's a trust but verify situation, right? Where we'll still have firewalls up around critical pieces of our technology. There's not one person that knows everything about our technology, so it's really hard to copy or steal. We will, in most cases, operate our facilities where we bring in a feed, we process and refine it, and then we output a product that goes back to our customers, and we get our technology fee. So there's kind of like separation of church and state in a lot of the processes that we've developed here, because we know the value in the technology that we've developed, and we're going to do everything in our power to protect that, even with our resource partners. So this is something that we've put a tremendous amount of thought and care into, and I think that we're in a really good position around that right now.
Okay, that's great. And I'm going to just tease out something, a couple of points that you made, just around competition. I used to, when I came out of the U.S. Attorney's Office, Teague, I'll admit I was a bit of a Bambi in the woods. I entered the private sector at Goldman Sachs, I drank the Kool-Aid about the private sector. Best ideas win. Smartest people prevail and all that. And over my 20 years, I came to learn that's not always the case, in part because competition is not always fair. And so an important point that you made, and I don't want to get into the broader discussion, but that when state sponsors enter marketplaces backing their companies, they often can offer, I'll use the term incentives, I'll put that in quotes, that provide a competitive advantage that may allow less effective and efficient technologies and companies to be left by the wayside. So that's the nature of the geopolitical competition in the marketplaces, et cetera. And I also want to pull out the fact that, and it's not the headline here in the podcast, the headline is what you're doing and why you're doing it, and sort of why this is a very exciting technology. But there is a global arms race, as you said, in securing essential materials and elements and preserving supply chain and making sure that there is sufficient and I'll use the term independent and secure sources of supply for the energy transition that we in Europe are undertaking or trying to. So appreciate very, very much your perspectives, and appreciate very much that you are in the lithium business, you're on the technology business, but you're also in the geopolitical, what I'll refer to competitive race business as well. So hopefully you'll keep us posted as you make progress and you get to the 9 stage of NASA's scale. But it's very, very exciting what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you came to enter the market. So thanks for spending time with us.
Thanks for having me.
This is the RANE Insights podcast, which is part of the RANE Insights series, comprised of both virtual and real-world events offering unique, practical perspectives from RANE's leading experts in risk management. To learn more, please visit us at ranenetwork.com. That's RANE network.com. Thanks for listening.